Awesome. Wonderful. Hey, so are you guys sitting next to someone you already know? How many of you are sitting next to someone you already know? Okay. That's not good. Okay. What I actually want is for you to sit next to someone you don't know. Can you do that? Can you spend a few minutes and rearrange yourself so you're sitting next to someone you don't know? Just okay. Okay, are you all sitting next to someone you do not know? Yes? Very good. I want you to think for a moment. I want to introduce yourself to each other, and I want you to tell the other person something that people don't commonly know about you. Okay? So think about something that people don't know about you and share that with the other person. Go. Okay. Has everybody shared? Have you had a chance to tell each other? Fantastic. Boy, you guys are really sharing. I can see that you've been dying to talk to each other all morning. Very good. Were there any surprises? Was there anything unexpected? Does anyone want to shout anything out? Is there anything surprising here? Or what did you learn about this person? He has 3 children? Okay, all right, that's, all right. Okay, what about over here? What did you learn? Yeah, something unusual. Okay, all right. Okay, now that's a little bit more unusual to say like, whoa, this person's in the pharmaceutical industry. That's not very unusual. Come on, you guys can do better than that. What else? Yes. He drinks coffee, but he actually doesn't like it. Okay. So one thing that people don't know about me that you wouldn't find on my LinkedIn profile was that when I was a child, I won awards for playing the accordion. Who knew? So, go figure. But now, you've just met someone you never knew before, right? Awesome. So, how many of you were here yesterday for David No's talk about behavior design? Okay. And so we're going to do a review, because I am an educator. And then for those of you who weren't here, you're going to learn something new. All right. So, the Fogg behavior model. Does anyone remember what the Fogg behavior model was yesterday? Shout out. Yeah, behavior is equal to motivation, ability, and a prompt, right? And we have this lovely graph, and we have motivation this way, and, high motivation and low motivation, and then we have ability over here. This is easy to do, and this is hard to do. And then we have this lovely activation line, and then we have prompts, right? And, things happen here. So, behavior is comprised of motivation, ability, and a prompt, right? If any of these are missing, the behavior isn't going to happen. So those of you yesterday, you remember that. I'm going to go a little bit deeper than David did yesterday, because I'm really going to focus on this thing about ability. So ability, what the heck is ability? Well, it means that can you do the thing or not? So in ability, we have 6 things that we look at. One is, do you have the time to do it? right? The second one is, do you have the money to do it? Can you afford to do it? The other is, do you have the brain cycles, right? Do you have time to think about it? The next thing that we have is it routine or non-routine, right? Because if it's non-routine, you're probably not going to do it. And the next thing we have is there social conformity? Or is it socially deviant? And then the other one is, because we're all lazy. I know you guys are lazy. Does it require physical effort? Okay, so when we're looking to design any kind of behavior and it's not happening, the first thing I go to is looking at ability. Do people actually have the ability? And this is the diagnostic for it, right? So hold that thought. Now we're going to get into this. So I'm going to talk to you about how to design behavior for peace. But I got to tell you the backstory. Once upon a time, B.J. Fogg thought, gee, he did this Facebook class in 2007, and it was epic at Stanford. It was just amazing. 10 weeks, 10 million downloads. These students were making thousands of dollars a week. It was crazy. All the VCs showed up. There were 500 people in the final class presentation. It was like, crazy. And he said, holy smokes, if you can reach 16 million people in 10 weeks, doing pokes, sending kisses, doing all the goofy things that people were doing on Facebook, writing these tiny apps in 2007, could we focus on world peace? And so Mark Nelson is back here. He's the guy in the hat, except he's not wearing a hat right now. The hat is part of his brand. So if you see the only guy with a hat at this conference with a waistcoat, that's Mark Nelson. So he and I embarked on this adventure to figure out, well, what does this mean? This is one of these, talk about a crazy idea. But mind you, it's no crazier than saying that we're going to have people living on Mars. All right? People are throwing a shit ton of money to get people to live on Mars. I think this is as doable. All right? So that was our goal, is to do that. So let's think about, I'm going to tell you some stories. The first story is called Besties. So you guys all just made a friend right now, or at least you did the first baby step in making a friend, which is you introduced yourself, you had, some contact, some eye contact, and you shared something about yourself, right? And that's pretty easy to do in this environment. I gave you the prompt, right? Were you particularly motivated to do it? I don't know. But was it easy to do? Absolutely, because you were sitting next to someone you didn't know. So for BMAP, it worked, right? The motivation was low, but the action was easy. So I was able to push you over here into the prompt, and off you went. So in 2009, we were wondering, well, is there peace in the world? How can we see that in the world? And so we invited a number of companies to work with us to see if they could show us if they had, what kind of peace they were creating in the world. And so our flagship partner on this was Facebook. And what they did was they created a page called peace.facebook. And in it, they showed people making friends on a daily basis across a conflict boundary. And what was revolutionary about this was that, okay, close your eyes, and if I said to you, do you think Israelis and Palestinians make friends with each other? Yes? Well, okay, now you're looking at the data. No? No way. They're mortal enemies, right? It's like, the Montagues and the Capulets. They're going to kill each other. No way are they friends with each other. And yet, through Facebook, we were able to see that on a daily basis, there were unique friendships that countered the news and the received wisdom that Israelis and Palestinians could not ever be friends. Okay? And when we looked at this over the years, we were able to see, even when there was conflict, active conflict where they're throwing bombs at each other. Even with that, the new friendships that were created didn't go to zero. people were still making friends across that difference boundary, across that conflict boundary. And that was the first weak signal. If you could say, building off of what David was saying yesterday about snap tests, this was in some ways a digital snap test. Gosh, do you think that people across a conflict boundary would ever make friends with each other? I don't know. Let's see. There you go. Next story. Play nice. So, can you engineer behavior? Can you take a community where people don't treat each other well and experiment and find out if you can reduce toxic behavior? Do you think that's possible? Yes, no, yes? No? Okay. So, Riot Games, League of Legends. If you Google toxic video games, League of Legends comes to the top of the list. A couple of years ago, Jeff Lynn, who's the PhD psychologist at Riot Games, said, should we do something about it? And they looked at it and they said, well, actually, we need to as a business because it's hurting our bottom line. There is enough toxicity on this platform and on other video game platforms that a lot of players are choosing not to play. And if that trend continues, it's really going to hurt us. And so what they did was they started experimenting on how to change the user experience so players could be better to each other. So you could play the game, have a great time, not be harassed, not be insulted, and so on. And it was interesting because they did a variety of experiments on this, and this is just a simple one that they did, and this came out of an article in Nature. And what they did, and they did like hundreds of experiments over millions of players, and they were able to drop the toxic behavior by 40%. Wow, how do you do that? The fun fact that I found on this is that Riot tested 216 conditions in terms of prompting people and priming people against a control in which no tips were given. Now, you could never do that in a psychology department experiment where you're asking undergrads to come in and you're going to give them a $20 Amazon gift certificate. We're just never going to get a sample size that big that we can run 216 iterations on an experiment. But when you have a base of millions of people, you can do that. And you can very quickly, empirically see what works and what doesn't, what's going to move the needle and what doesn't. And here's another example of the kinds of experiments that they did. And what they ultimately did is started using machine learning and language analysis to be able to determine the kind of language that people were using so that way they could monitor this at scale. Ultimately, what happened this March at the Game Developers Conference was the Fair Play Alliance was formed. Over 70 video game companies signed up for this, where they're going to share research and best practices on how to improve the online community environment. Okay, so video games are like the tip of the spear. They're like the early warning system of the bad behavior, but now it's hitting them economically, and so now they're very incentivized to fix it. And they have the resources and the user base sample size to be able to test and fix that. Next, strangers in the night. If I had asked you 10 years ago, would you let a perfect stranger stay in your home? How many of you would say yes? Would you let a perfect stranger stay down the hall from your small child? Would you let a perfect stranger have your home for the weekend, someone you've never met before? How would you do that? And what is it worth if you could get that to happen? To be hospitable to perfect strangers? And would it be worth to get millions of people to be good to perfect strangers? And let me ask further, and even to be considerate, all these tiny behaviors, how would we do that? And if we could do that, is there any money in it? And then ultimately, can I get a perfect stranger? Can I trust a perfect stranger? And at what level? Would I trust a perfect stranger with my home, with all my possessions, with my collection of stuff? You know, they're going to look in my drawers, all of that business. Well, for Airbnb, they solved the problem of trust. They did it at scale. And for them, they've been able to get 2 million listings, 60 million guests, 191 countries across cultures. We could say, well, that might be something wacky that people in San Francisco do. But you know there's Airbnb in Afghanistan? Kind of crazy. What is that worth? Their valuation is $31 billion. And what's particularly interesting to me, because I'm a girl, I'm a woman, is that 55% of the hosts are women. And women are especially tuned to risk, safety, and security. And they've made 20 billion women. And so this has been an economic engine for women. Okay? And this was starting from the small idea of how do I get it to be socially acceptable. It's not socially deviant anymore to have someone to do this. And how do I make it physically safe for someone to be in your home? Right? Kind of crazy. So in our lab, what we ask is how good can we be to each other? And our toolkit is behavior design, and it's persuasive tech, and it's peace data. So, next exercise. I want you to think about all your group identities. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Okay, so I'm female, I'm short, I have long hair, so I belong to the tribe of women who wear long hair. I'm Hispanic, I speak English, I speak Spanish. I'm a Californian, I'm a technologist, I'm an academician, I'm an accordion player, I like to dance, and so on. So I want you to think about all your identities, the things that, you know, the different roles, depending upon where you are. Maybe you're a soccer fan in one context, maybe you're a parent in another context, and kind of make a mental note, write it down, and then share that list with the person next to you. Can you do that for the next few minutes? Yeah, either, you know, you can write the list on your cell phone or on paper. Just come up with your list, and then I want you to compare. How are you guys doing? Are you coming up with lists? Are you part of the obscure band of people who are interested in vintage 1920 airplanes from the Czech Republic? I know someone in the audience who's into that. Okay, you've got your lists? All right, compare. Okay, I can hear you guys are getting into it. Any surprises? For those of you, raise of hand, how many of you had one thing in common? How many of you had two things in common? How many of you had three things in common? How many of you had one thing that was very different? How many of you had two things that were different? Okay. So in the examples that I showed before, one of the key things was that we were having people who were very different come and do something together, right? And when we think about the behavior model, you know, all the platforms increase people's ability to do so. They may not have been particularly motivated, or maybe they were motivated, but it was really hard to do. But the platforms, the persuasive technology, the technology increased people's ability to do it and made it easy, right? So if you're on Facebook, you know, you might not be particularly motivated to make friends, although on Facebook, that's the whole point. And so, but Facebook makes it very easy to reach out and say, I'm just going to put out a friend request, boom, right? With Riot Games and League of Legends, you know, people were motivated to play well. And so because they were motivated to play well and win, getting the prompts of, you know, this kind of behavior results in this kind of outcome, right? You're more successful. Then they made it easy and it moved this bit right here. I'm motivated, but I don't know how to do it. It moved it over here, right? And Facebook, likewise, it moved it over here. And Airbnb, you know, or you may not have been motivated, but there was social proof, right? Depending upon where you are, you can move things up this way or that way. And then you just get the prompt and it happens. So, when we think about peace, we think about quantified peace. And we think about it behaviorally, because peace is very squishy, hippy-dippy, kumbaya. How do I operationalize that, right? Like, what do you mean? But when I break it down into behaviors, into discrete episodes of engagement, where I'm saying, I just want you to make a friend with the person next to you. That's a tiny behavior, and you can do that. And we can scaffold it to a lot of other behaviors. And we call those episodes of engagement. So when we are looking at peace data, we're looking at person A, and they have a social identity, and we're looking at person B, and they have a social identity, and that's what you guys just did right now. You shared your social identities. You know, like, I'm this, 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 and you're that, 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 and this is where we're different, and this is where we're similar. When we have technology in the middle, because increasingly, we're talking to each other through a piece of glass, right? That technology can act as the prompt, it can act as the motivator, and it can also give us the ability to engage with each other. The other thing the technology does is it captures the data. It has a sensor, so there's evidence of whether or not that thing occurred. So as a social scientist, although my degree is in engineering, but I am personally a social scientist during the day, we can now see empirically what people actually do through these technologies. And that's very powerful. That's something that didn't exist 20 years ago. So, what we did after wandering around in the wilderness for 9 years, right, Mr. Nelson? We said, aha, we're seeing all these examples in the field. It's like people are kind of doing this. We think that all this is actually peace data. And we defined it, and Mark co-authored a paper that was published this May in the Frontiers in Psychology, talking about something that's brand new, which is called the Peace Data Standard. And when we're in The Hague, we call it the Hague Peace Data Standard. And it is a theoretical framework for how to look at the data that you already have, the behavior data that you have, through this peace lens. And here's some samples of it from the paper. And we did Mark and his co-authors did a study looking at an Australian financial institution. And they were looking at gender engagement. So is gender an issue around here? Like, you know, How many women are in the room? Yeah. Yes, right. So, like, how do we get more women in X, right? And do women feel left out in X? And why aren't there more women here? So, we looked at this, this financial institution in Australia, and it was a great case because the employee base was roughly 50-50 male-female. Looked at their Yammer data. Because we wanted to see what the episodes of engagement were between men and women in the organization. And what might that tell us about the behavior between them and what's going on, just at a quantitative level. And so we can look at this and you start thinking, well, what are all the touch points? What if we could do an analytics on your Gmail? What if you had a dashboard on your Gmail and it gave you personal analytics and let you know what your response rate was on your email in general, and then it broke it down based on various demographics? How quickly do you get back to your coworkers? How quickly do you get back to your male coworkers versus your female coworkers? How quickly do you respond to someone in another department? Because that's a difference boundary as well. And so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, so you start getting a performance score, and you go like, oh, okay, well, it's not about like, you know, you're sexist or you're biased or this or that. It's just like, no, actually, I want to be more responsive, and my KPI is, my commitment is to get back to people within 24 hours. How am I doing? I'm doing really well with Joe, but I stink with Jill, because it takes me a week to get back to her. Why is that? The data isn't judging you. Well, I might. But the data isn't judging you. It's just giving you feedback, right? So, but when we start breaking this down and starting doing these analytics, then you might be able to assign an economic value to that, right? And so if we look at, you know, the sender is male, so we're capturing gender, we have the technology, we know who the recipient is, their group identity, and it could be any group identity that you choose. It doesn't have to be gender, it could be anything else. It could be, you know, how well does the marketing department talk to the engineering department? Do they talk to each other at all? And we know, how many corporations are siloed? Are you in a siloed organization? You know, where like your department doesn't work with another group? Yeah, it happens. Especially in hierarchical organizations. So all of a sudden we get this visibility in terms of the interactions, the episodes of engagement with people. And you can assign an economic value to it, potentially. And you know, there are boundaries, nationality, age, neighborhood, and so on. Imagine that you were using a project management platform and you were putting together a team. How many of you use things like Asana and Trello and things like that, right? So we use Asana, and I go, if I was in a large organization and I was putting together the team for a project, and Asana could give me feedback that says, we know that you got the functions, that you got, you know, your product developer, you got your engineer, you got your marketer and all that, but you know what? You lack diversity in this because they all came from the same school. So you're going to get some groupthink. Or, you know, maybe you can make recommendations and say like, okay, instead of this person, you have that person. They have the same ability to do the work, but they have a different lived experience that may be relevant to the project. Wow. If that was easy, if you had the ability to do that, you could organize a more diverse team. But right now it's really hard because you don't have access to the data, and you can't play around with it and say like, oh, well, let me tinker around with the team. I have to know people, and so my bias, because I'm lazy, because I don't want to put a lot of brain cycles into it, is that I'm going to go with the people I already know because I'm comfortable with them. So this paper is a beta. And so what I'm inviting all of you to do is to help us refine this, because it is a theoretical framework and it's going to evolve. It's a living document. But guess what? Every company has piece data. It's not just tech companies. Every organization does. If you have a supply chain, if you use technology, you know, in your day-to-day business, that data that you have in your organization potentially can tell us a lot and can tell you a lot about the health of your organization, the health of your customers, and so on. So, what's in it for me? You say, okay, this is very nice. I learned a little bit about BMAP and ability, and you're telling me about piece data, and it's all kumbaya. Well, guess what? You might get paid for it. Why is that? And how? And what's the connection? And tell me more, please. Because business does more for peace than anyone else. When we think about how we interact with people on a day-to-day basis, When you're interacting with another person, when you're not at home asleep or when you're not interacting with your family, where are you interacting with people the most? Work, commerce, trade, the coffee shop. There's some sort of economic exchange that's going on. There's some kind of interaction, something that's bringing you together. Because a person is different from you. I need coffee, you have coffee. That's a difference boundary. I'm going to pay you for the coffee. Right? If I have coffee and you have coffee, there's no transaction to be had. There's no exchange to be had. There's no episode of engagement to be had necessarily. But commerce can do this. And this is a very old idea that trade and commerce can be a tool for peace. So when we think about this, we're looking at positive engagement with people, being good to each other, which in the business circles might be called like the customer service, creating an extraordinary customer experience. Doing those things is positive peace, right? How many of you work for an airline? Nobody, thank God. How many of you have been on an airline? How awesome was that experience? Anyone have an awesome experience on an airline? Okay, how many of you had a terrible experience on an airline? Yeah, right? Airlines are designed for extraordinary customer experience. They're not designed for positive engagement. They treat you like a piece of freight. They move you from point A to point B. But imagine that they had this mindset of, I want to create this great episode of engagement with you. That's just wonderful. That would transform the industry. So, business has to generate mutual benefit. Otherwise, there's no trade. And that's where the group difference comes in. So, the thing about business is that sustainable, and I'm talking sustainable as in you have to have a business model, because we might be able to do nice things for each other for a period of time. We might volunteer to do that, but after a while, we run out of goodwill, right? I can't do it indefinitely. I might invite a stranger into my home once because someone needs a place to sleep for a night, but it's not something that I would do on a regular basis. On the other hand, if I'm an Airbnb host, I might want to do that 50 nights a year because I'm getting paid. Hey, it's worth my time. But we know that there are two problems. You don't get credit for the piece at creating, and you don't get paid. And so we designed the Peace Data Standard so that way we could measure what you're doing so you can get credit. And the next thing that we want to do is enable the equivalent of carbon credits for peace credits. You got to invent it. I need your help. But imagine a world where you could show your scorecard of the amount of positive engagement you're creating in the world. That your business, because it exists, because of the way you interact with your customers and your stakeholders, is indeed making the world a better place, and you can demonstrate it through the data, and it can be audited, and it can be proven. So peace credits? Absolutely. So you get recognized and paid for the peace, because one of the things that we need to solve is creating a price signal for peace. Just as we need to create a price signal for the environment and clean water and clean air and say like, hell yes, we need to have that happen, we also need to provide economic incentives for people to create more peace in the world. So, how are you going to do that? This is the call to action. I want you to join us in helping make this happen in the world. To take it from an idea to a framework into something that is actually part of our economy and part of how we run our business. And it becomes just normal, right? This is just something that we do. So we've started a Peace Innovation Institute in The Hague, which is about an hour flight from here. It's not very far. So Mark and I spend part of our time here in The Hague with the Peace Innovation Institute. It's the organizing body. The Peace Data Standard is our lighthouse project. And we are in the process of putting together an advisory board and an industry affiliation because we want to create a standards body to make this happen. So this is an open invitation for you to be a part of this. And if you want to learn more, there's a QR code, there's peace credits, or you can email me at margarita@peaceinnovation.com. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much.